So you are asking yourself, ISA or pension, which one should you spend first in retirement? Nearly every calculator and most advisors say the same thing. Spend the ISA first, because it is already tax-free, and leave the pension untouched to keep growing. That advice can quietly cost you tens of thousands of pounds, and almost nobody explains why. The reason has a name. It is called the sequence of returns trap. By running your ISA down first, you leave your pension fully exposed to the next market fall, and when that fall comes, you are forced to sell pension units at exactly the moment they are cheapest. That single mistake can permanently shrink a pension pot that would otherwise have recovered. I am going to show you the order that reverses this risk, and it flips the standard advice on its head. Once you see the maths, the obvious answer starts to look like the wrong one. The next part of this video puts an exact figure on what the standard advice costs and shows you why protecting the pension at all costs is no longer the golden rule it used to be. If you are within 10 years of retiring in the United Kingdom, or you have already stopped working, this one decision affects how long your money lasts. Subscribe to Arthur's UK Retirement Guide, because what comes next is the framework most calculators never show you. Meet Peter. He is 62, he lives in the United Kingdom, and after decades of careful saving, he has £350,000 sitting in his SIPP and £100,000 in his I. Like most people approaching this decision, he follows the advice everyone gives. Spend the ISA first, leave the pension alone. Here is what that choice costs him before the market has even moved. Every year, Peter is entitled to a personal allowance of £12,570 income he could draw from his pension completely free of tax. If he spends the ISA instead and ignores that allowance, he loses it. It does not carry over to next year. Do that for a decade, and it adds up to a tax saving of roughly £9,000 he never claims, simply by drawing from the wrong pot first. Think about what £9,000 actually covers. That is several years of a council tax bill, a decent chunk of a boiler replacement, or the sort of car repair bill that always seems to land at the worst possible moment. The person who draws their personal allowance from the pension every year keeps that money working for them. The person who empties the ISA first is quietly handing it away and never even notices it is gone. But tax is only half of what is wrong with the standard advice. Here is the part that actually hurts. Peter retires, and within the first couple of years, the market falls 20%. His £350,000 pension is suddenly worth £280,000. On paper, that is not a disaster. Markets fall and markets recover. The disaster is timing. Because Peter already spent his ISA keeping himself afloat, by year 3 he has no cash buffer left anywhere except inside the pension itself. He has no choice but to start selling pension units to cover his bills, and he is selling them at exactly the moment they are worth the least. This has a name. It is called the sequence of returns trap, and it is the real danger hiding inside the ISA first rule. A 20% fall needs a 25% gain just to get back to where you started, and Peter is locking that loss in permanently, selling low instead of waiting it out. So who was the old advice actually built for? Spend the ISA, protect the pension, made perfect sense back when pensions sat completely outside your estate for inheritance tax purposes. It was a strategy designed for passing wealth on to children, not for paying your own bills in retirement. For most people who need this money to actually live on, it was the wrong order from the start, and changes arriving in 2027 to how pensions are treated for inheritance tax are about to make that old logic weaker still. We will come back to that shortly. If the standard advice is already costing this much before the market has had its say, there has to be a better order for drawing down these two pots. That is exactly what comes next, and I call it the Handbrake and Engine framework. Here is the part that trips almost everyone up. Spending the ISA first feels safe. The balance goes down, there is no tax bill, no paperwork, no fuss. Your brain treats that money as already yours, no strings attached. Meanwhile, the money sitting in the pension, untouched, feels protected simply because you have not looked at it. That feeling is the trap. The pension you are leaving alone is fully exposed to whatever the market does next, and spending the ISA first does not protect your retirement. It makes it less safe because it strips away the one cushion that would have stopped you from having to sell the pension during a downturn. There is a second piece of hidden math most people never see, and it is about the tax-free lump sum. Most guidance says take the full 25% out of your pension the day you retire and drop it straight into an ISA. If you already have a reasonable ISA balance, that move creates what I would call cash drag. Money pulled out of the pension stops growing inside that tax-free wrapper, and your ISA ends up holding a pile of cash that is not actually needed yet, quietly losing value to inflation while it sits there. The better approach is usually to take that 25% in stages, a method called phased UFPLS. Instead of pulling it all out at once, you crystallize just enough each year to top up your cash buffer and leave the rest growing untouched inside the pension for as long as possible. I used to tell people to take the full tax-free lump sum straight away. Every calculator pointed to it, and it seemed like the obvious move. But when I actually followed people through it, I kept seeing the same pattern play out. The cash sat in an ISA, inflation quietly ate into it, and years later they were short on pension income when they needed it most. That changed my mind. Phasing it a little each year is usually the smarter play. I have also watched people go through the 2022 market downturn with no cash buffer at all, and it was not pretty. The ones who had planned ahead, who were drawing their personal allowance from the pension and topping up from an ISA, slept fine through it. The ones who had nothing left but pension units did not. So here is the framework, and it is simpler than it sounds. Think of your ISA as the handbrake. It is your cash buffer, your safety net, the account that absorbs the unexpected car repair, the new boiler, the health cost that shows up without warning. Think of your pension as the engine. It is the long-term growth machine that needs time and stability to keep doing its job. The driving rule works like this. First, pay yourself a regular income from the pension up to the personal allowance. £12,570, and you owe no tax on it at all. Second, top up whatever else you need from the ISA. Third, when the market is doing well, gradually refill the ISA using the pension's tax-free cash, a little at a time, not all in one go. One more number worth knowing. Right now you can access a private pension from age 55, though that rises to 57 from the 6th of April, 2028. Whatever your starting age, the order you draw from these two pots matters more than the exact age you begin. There is another change coming that removes the last argument for starving yourself today just to protect the pension for later. And it is worth understanding before you lock in any plan. The main reason retirees were told to spend the ISA first and leave the pension untouched was inheritance tax. Under the current rules, any pension money you have not spent when you die sits outside your estate. That made it one of the most powerful inheritance tax shelters available, and it is why protect the pension at all costs became the default advice for so long. That is changing. From April 2027, unused pension funds and death benefits are set to be brought inside your estate for inheritance tax purposes. This does not mean your pension gets taxed twice in some punishing new way, and the headlines that make it sound that way are overstating it. What it does mean is that the old argument for leaving your pension completely untouched, purely to pass on a bigger number to your children, loses a large part of its force. Why does this matter to you before any of this even takes effect? Because it changes the calculation. If preserving the pension for inheritance purposes is no longer the guaranteed win it once was, there is less reason to underspend your own income now just to protect a legacy that will be taxed differently anyway. It adds more weight to using your personal allowance for your own needs while you are the one living your retirement, not just banking it for later. This is not a reason to panic or to rush any decision. It is a reason to stop treating protect the pension as an automatic rule and start treating it as one factor among several. The old rule is fading. What replaces it needs to be tested against how markets actually behave, not just against a tax planning worksheet. So the old rule is gone. Let's stress test what actually happens to these two paths when a real market downturn hits. Let's picture this properly, side by side. Peter needs £30,000 a year to cover his living costs, and the market drops 20% early in his retirement. Two very different paths open up from that single moment, depending on which pot he draws down first. Path A is the fragility path, the one built on spend the ISA first. Year 1 he draws from the ISA. Year 2 the ISA again. By year 3 the ISA is empty. From years 4 through 7 he has no choice but to draw from the pension while it is still 20% to 25% below where it started, selling units at rock-bottom prices just to pay the bills. By the time the pension eventually recovers in value, Peter has already sold off a large number of units at the worst possible prices. The permanent damage works out to roughly a year and a half of planned income that simply is not there anymore. Path B is the resilience path, the one built on drawing the personal allowance first and topping up from the ISA. For the first 5 years, Peter draws £12,570 from the pension, paying no tax on it at all, and tops up the remaining £17,430 from the ISA. His pension units are barely touched during the downturn. By the time the market recovers, the pension has recovered in full alongside it. The ISA balance is lower than it would have been, but that was its job all along, to absorb the shock so the pension never had to. The difference is not just numbers on a spreadsheet. It shows up in ordinary decisions too, whether Peter can still afford the odd holiday, whether a car repair bill turns into a real problem, whether he lies awake doing mental maths every time the news mentions a market fall. Path B removes most of that background noise simply because the order of withdrawals was set up correctly from day one. Spreadsheets do not capture what Path A actually feels like to live through. It is watching your pension crater while your cash is running out underneath you, with no idea how long the fall will last. Path B feels more like flying with the controls in your hands. You know the order, you know the levers, and the fear that usually drives people into bad decisions has much less room to operate. This sounds solid as a model. The real test is setting it up in your own accounts and knowing what is likely to get in your own way before it does. The hardest part of all this is not the maths. It is pulling the trigger on the pension. Your brain has a script running in the background that says ISA cash is mine today and the pension is sacred, untouchable for later. Psychologists call this the endowment effect, and it makes us overvalue whatever we already have our hands on. It is exactly why spend the ISA first feels safer than it actually is. If that describes you, there is nothing wrong with you. Every single person I have worked through this with goes through some version of that same hesitation. You are not being irrational. You are protecting yourself from a pain point, the discomfort of watching a number you worked your whole life for go down. The problem is that this instinct quietly pushes you toward the choice that is actually less safe. Try reframing it this way. You are not spending your pension. You are paying yourself the salary you already earned. The tax relief showed up when you paid in years ago, and the tax bill shows up now when you take it out. The only mistake worth avoiding is overpaying by leaving your personal allowance sitting unused while you live off the ISA instead. Here is the plan for putting this into practice. First, build a cash buffer. Keep 2 to 3 years of living expenses in easy access savings, premium bonds, or very short-term accounts inside your ISA. This is what protects you from ever having to sell pension units during a downturn. Second, set up a regular pension drawdown. Arrange to take up to £12,570 a year from your defined contribution pension. You pay no tax on it. Do not let that allowance go to waste, year after year, simply because it feels easier to leave the pension alone. Third, use the ISA as your flexible top-up. Whatever you need beyond the personal allowance comes from here. Think of it as a tap you can turn up or down depending on the year. Fourth, manage the 25% tax-free lump sum carefully. Rather than taking it all in one go, use phased UFPLS to release it gradually, refilling your cash buffer a little at a time while the rest keeps growing inside the pension. Fifth, watch the money purchase annual allowance. The moment you start taking taxable income from a defined contribution pension, your annual allowance for further pension contributions drops to £10,000 down from the usual £60,000. If there is any chance you go back to some form of paid work later, this is worth planning around now. If Peter's numbers, £350,000 in a pension and £100,000 in an ISA, feel a long way from your own situation, do not let that put you off. The mechanism works exactly the same way with a £100,000 pension and a £30,000 ISA. The tax thresholds, the buffer, the order of operations, all of it applies regardless of the size of the pot. I do not have a crystal ball for where markets go next or for your exact tax situation 5 years from now. Nobody does. But the mechanics behind this order are about as solid as anything gets in retirement planning, and they hold regardless of what the market does in any given year. If all of this feels like a lot of moving parts to track, the next part brings it down to 3 sentences, simple enough to stick on your fridge. Stop asking whether you should spend the ISA or the pension first. That is the wrong question. The real question is what mix works best for you this year, and the answer rarely stays fixed for the whole of retirement. Draw your pension up to the personal allowance every year, £12,570 tax-free. Use your ISA as the flexible shock absorber for whatever else you need. Take your 25% tax-free lump sum in stages rather than all at once, and revisit the whole plan once the 2027 inheritance tax changes actually land, because the rules around pensions rarely stay still for long. You do not need a perfect spreadsheet to get this right. You need a system that still works when life, or the market, throws something at you that you did not plan for. If you want to keep learning how to navigate UK retirement planning without the noise, subscribe to Arthur's UK Retirement Guide. The rules keep changing, and I will keep explaining them in plain English, with real numbers, as they do. You have spent decades building this. The order in which you spend it now decides how long it lasts, and how much of it is still there for the people you love. See you next week.